To who are looking at those inflation figures, they are looking at those interest rate rises, and they are worried about them, and we completely get that, and we want to give them certainty as soon as we can. The Prime Minister, the Chancellor, me, the other members of government recognise that British people want to see us getting on with our job. That's what she's focused on, that's what I'm focused on, and that's what we're going to work on now.
Liz Truss is said to be quizzed over her leadership during Prime Minister's questions today. She's going to face the Labour leader for the first time since abandoning her economic strategy in the wake of the turmoil after the mini-budget. She's also expected to be asked whether she'll commit to her promise to increase the state pension. The Prime Minister's battling to convince Conservative MPs that she should remain in charge after a poll of party members showed 83% believe she's doing a bad job. A report into maternity failings at East Kent Hospital NHS Trust is going to be published this morning. It's expected to say that newborn babies died due to poor care spanning several years. The report's findings are also going to show that families were often ignored or had their concerns overlooked. More than 200 cases dating back to 2009 have been examined by an expert panel. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace is in Washington to discuss security concerns, including Russia's war with Ukraine. Well, it's after Moscow said the 4 regions it illegally annexed now fall under the protection of Russia's nuclear arsenal. Ukraine's accused Russia of using Iranian drones during attacks in recent weeks, which both countries have denied. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. It's GB News. Now let's head back to the morning briefing with Tom.
Good morning, it's 9:33 and this is the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Today, a flashpoint. Prime Minister Liz Truss will face her opposite number, Sir Keir Starmer, at Prime Minister's questions at noon today. It will serve as yet another test to see if she can hold on to her teetering premiership after just 5 weeks in the job, each more tumultuous than the last. Last night, she met the influential European Research Group of Conservative MPs. Members who attended said that the meeting had an overall improved tone. Among other things, Truss reiterated she's determined to deliver on her Northern Ireland Protocol bill. That, however, may be the end of the good news for Liz Truss, as the Office for National Statistics this morning published its inflation figures, with the level returning now to double digits. Inflation has been higher than expected, 10.1% in September, up from 9.9% in August. And now a row is brewing over the pensions triple lock, an incredibly expensive policy to raise pensions by 3 distinct metrics, whichever is highest, brought in by David Cameron in 2010. Now, with this potential change, pensions are still expected to rise, but perhaps by other metrics going forward. It certainly is going to be a very long day for the Prime Minister. Let's discuss it all now. Throughout the show, I'm joined by the Deputy Political Editor of the Daily Mirror, Ben Glaze. Ben, first of all, this is a bit of an odd one for Prime Minister's questions. There's a lot of speculation that Sir Keir Starmer is thinking about potentially not going so hard against Liz Truss. Potentially he wants to keep her in the job. Potentially he thinks of her as a better opponent.
That's right. I mean, there must be a temptation for Labour to soft pedal, really, on Liz Truss at the moment, because she is turning out to be one of Labour's best assets. The longer she's there, I mean, you've seen the poll leads that Labour's enjoying 20, 25, even 30 points ahead. If Liz Truss is still the Prime Minister come the next general election, which, let's face it, is highly unlikely as it stands, but Labour would be looking at a landslide majority. So Keir Starmer might not want to go too hard on the Prime Minister at Prime Minister's questions at noon, because if she has a particularly poor showing, the Tory MPs sitting behind her may start thinking, we've really got to act very soon now to get this over and done with.
Now, has the biggest moment of immediate danger for the Prime Minister potentially passed? Things were very, very choppy on Friday, potentially over the weekend as well. She's been having an awful lot of meetings. She had members of Parliament in Number 10 for a drinks reception last night. She met with the European Research Group. She's met with the One Nation group of Tory backbenchers as well. She had a reception for her cabinet. It seems like she's doing the rounds and potentially easing things off. Will Conservative MPs at least give her till the end of the month, till that medium-term fiscal statement?
I think this courting of the parliamentary party, it's really designed to try and take the sting out of the attacks on her leadership. But it's all coming a bit too late. You know, the damage has been done. You know, it was excruciating watching the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, unpick every single one, or almost every single one of her mini-budget policies that was announced. And she had to sit behind him for, I think it was 29 minutes on Monday in sort of stunned silence watching that happen. And in the aftermath of that, she's gone around the various caucuses of the Conservative Party, trying to, I was going to say shore up support, but it's not even shore up support. It's sort of try and build a bit of support and quell the rebellion, really. It's probably done enough to buy her until Halloween, because that's when we're getting another fiscal statement from Chancellor Jeremy Hunt. And of course, we're going to get those all-important Office for Budget Responsibility forecasts. Now, I think the Parliamentary Party will want to see what they say, and then that's the real flashpoint in the next couple of weeks for the Prime Minister. But I think she probably has bought herself until the end of the month.
Well, let's take that question and turn it to a member of the Conservative Party, indeed a backbench member of Parliament. I'm delighted to be joined now by the Conservative MP for Shrewsbury. Oh, I don't think we've actually quite got... No, we do. Daniel Kaczynski can join us now, the Member of Parliament for Shrewsbury. Thank you for joining us this morning, Daniel. First of all, do you believe that the Prime Minister is the best person for the job?
Well, what I would say is that she has been democratically elected by the members of the Conservative Party across the whole of the United Kingdom. And it's too early to tell, just after 4 or 5 weeks of her premiership, what sort of Prime Minister she's going to be. And we're British. We don't tend to throw people under a bus unnecessarily until we understand fully their attributes, their skill sets, and their ability to run the country. And I'm very concerned about this sort of hysterical witch hunt against the Prime Minister. She's a very courageous woman who is dealing with unprecedented difficulties for the United Kingdom, because all governments historically have borrowed money, and the chickens are coming home to roost at the moment. When you are £2.1 trillion in debt, when you've got debt interest payments of £90 billion per annum, these are difficulties of biblical proportions. I admire her courage. I regret that the policies that were announced have not succeeded through the international markets, and very much hope that the Parliamentary Party can get behind her and the new Chancellor to get us through this economic and political storm, because ultimately the real adversary is the Labour Party. And let's not forget, they have not come up with an credible economic alternative. That's what the next election has to be about. No longer will the British electorate tolerate a debate about how to redistribute the shrinking cake that we have. They want an analysis and debate as to how we grow the economy and how we ultimately create an economy which pays for itself rather than continuing to borrow money on an annual basis.
Well, Daniel Kaczynski, we will be putting that question to the Labour MP Peter Dowd a little bit later in the programme. But for now, is it your view that the U-turns that this Prime Minister has performed, I've lost count of the number of U-turns she has now performed, were they, in your view, the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do?
Well, the U-turn was, in my view, absolutely wrong, and I very much regret that. I think that what they wanted to do ultimately at this moment in time is to borrow £45 billion in order to, in addition to helping people with the energy costs, they wanted to borrow £45 billion to change the taxation system so that we no longer have highly pernicious levels of taxation across the board. And let's get this into perspective. £45 billion is 2% of the national debt. And the amount that was going to go to the top 1%, £2 billion, is 0.1% of the national debt. So they were these are relatively modest figures. If you put it in the context of the whole of the national debt, we can no longer continue, as I said, to carry on with the previous model of borrowing money every year and not paying for ourselves. We need a radical change in the taxation system. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of highly skilled Britons have left this country over the last few decades. They've closed their factories and they have moved to jurisdictions where taxation is far less. The top level of taxation in Singapore is 16%. How on earth can we expect to compete against countries like Singapore, the United Arab Emirates, and many other jurisdictions around the world if we continue to have levels of taxation which penalize entrepreneurs and penalize the wealth creators, people that we need to retain and attract to the United Kingdom in a post-Brexit context? So I regret that U-turn. I think we should have stayed strong as a party, strong as a country, to get through the requirement of that borrowing. I regret the U-turn, no doubt about it.
The United Kingdom's debt to GDP ratio is indeed less than that of the United States, less than that of Canada, of Italy, of France, of Japan. Why then did the Prime Minister U-turn? Do you think she would be in a stronger position now had she stayed the course?
Well, that's a brilliant question, and of course it's one that I've made repeatedly. If the United Kingdom, and by the way, the socialists admonished us and the most vilified us when we came into office in 2010 for having the temerity of trying to get the public finances back into the black. Every year from 2010 to 2019, we reduced the annual deficit. 2019, the year before the pandemic started, is the closest that this country has come to running a balanced budget. I'm very proud of the fact that we did that work. If we hadn't done that work, the situation would be even more difficult. But yes, your point is absolutely correct. Our debt to GDP ratio is much lower than most of our industrial competitors, especially France, Italy, and Japan. And so I'm very surprised the markets reacted in the way that they did. If the United Kingdom had been the most indebted nation of the G8 and the G20, and we were going in to borrow an extra £45 billion, I could understand them being worried and reticent. But it's the direct opposite is the truth. And so you have to ask yourself the question, who is it in the British establishment, either at the Treasury or the Bank of England or in the House of Commons or in the media, who is it who is responsible for not getting behind the United Kingdom at this difficult time and showing division from the British side, which ultimately led to a lack of confidence in lending Britain that extra £45 billion? That's the question that I want to have answered.
That's a really interesting point there. You, Daniel Kaczynski, are pointing to division and perhaps undermining from various institutions in the United Kingdom for that instability. We'll hold that thought, but thank you so much for joining us here on the briefing this morning. Really appreciate your thoughts and your time. Let's turn now back to the Deputy Political Editor of the Daily Mirror, Ben Glaze. What did you make of what Daniel Kaczynski had to say there? Do you think that that's a view that is widely replicated on the Conservative backbenches, the people who almost want to support Liz Truss but wished she was a bit more resolute?
I'm fairly astonished at what Daniel Kaczynski just said there. He seems to be, she should have ploughed on. And, you know, he's flabbergasted by the reaction of the markets. Well, it's all very well for him to be surprised by it, but it did happen. We saw what was happening on those financial markets, the turmoil that was created. You know, even Liz Truss admits she had to U-turn. That's why we've had this shenanigans over the past few days. Daniel Kaczynski seems to be suggesting there was some sort of deep state element there, trying to persuade the markets to move against the United Kingdom. I mean, it was an absolutely bizarre interview.
Although I suppose you could point to some market expectations of the ability to pass, for example, supply-side reform or the open-ended commitment of the energy price guarantee. Perhaps political instability does have a bit of a factor there, but potentially not some organised conspiracy, of course. Actually, the idea that a weakened Prime Minister, a Prime Minister with less political capital, would less be able to pass the tough stuff or potentially cut spending, and that may well contribute to market jitteriness.
I think the markets looked at the plan for growth and just thought this won't work. You know, it is unsustainable. It cannot be implemented. Bearing in mind, the government still has a working majority of 71. You know, it's shed a few from the 80 seats that Boris Johnson won in December 2019. But a government with a 71 majority should be able to push through legislation, should be able to push through these measures. You know, it wasn't even the Conservative Party that actually rebelled against this to start with. It was the confidence that the markets did not have in Liz Truss and in the plan. It just thought Britain can't be trusted to pay its debts. That's why the financial markets rebelled against Kwasi Kwarteng's plan for growth. That's why Liz Truss had to sack her friend, long-time friend, ally, neighbour, get him out of the Treasury and bring in Jeremy Hunt, who, you know, they're not best friends or anything by any standards. So that it's a political humiliation for the Prime Minister. She accepted she had to do it. It's interesting that Daniel Kaczynski didn't accept that.
Well, let's turn now to a view from the other side of the House of Commons. Peter Dowd is the Labour Member of Parliament for Bootle and former Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Thank you for joining us here on the briefing this morning. I suppose the first question is, who should Sir Keir Starmer address his questions at Prime Minister's Questions today to? Liz Truss or Jeremy Hunt?
Well, the only one he can address them to is the Prime Minister, if she turns up. And can I just repeat, I think that was remarkable interview in terms of sort of conspiracy theory. The thing is with the Tories, we've had them in power for 12 years and they're blaming everybody else bar themselves. They're blaming the markets, they're blaming the civil service, they're blaming the trade unions, they're blaming everybody but themselves. They have been in power and they should have the guts to admit that they got it wrong instead of blaming everybody else. Simple as that. And Keir Starmer should take Liz Truss to task on her policy today. They're her policies.
So looking at where we are now with the market reaction, there's been a number of pieces of commentary in the last week that this is obviously a damaging time for the government. But to some extent, this is a worrying time for any potential future radical Labour government too. Does the reaction of the markets in the last few weeks not justify the coalition government's response to the global financial crisis from 2010, the idea that there needed to be fiscal consolidation rather than deficit-funded spending? Might things have acted in the way that they did in the last few weeks if in 2010 the government had ballooned the deficit rather than reducing it?
Well, it's we're in this sort of what-if hypothetical territory. We have to deal with what we've got, and we didn't get to where we are now in terms of the deficit and actually the debt. I mean, the Tories have effectively doubled the debt since 2010. That's their responsibility. It just didn't happen overnight. They just didn't wake up one morning and find it's gone from 850 or 900 billion to best part of 2 trillion. Is they just, oh dear, look, that's happened overnight. This has been a situation that has developed for the past 12 years. We're now, and we said this is the sort of thing that might happen. They've just carried on regardless. And we're now in this situation made by them, created by them. And that's it. So it's not something that's happened now overnight that you can just then fix with a little tweaking here and there, or a little bit here and a little bit there. This is a sustained period of austerity that's coming home to bite us on the backside. I mean, that's it. If we want to be simple about things, that's how simple it is.
But Peter Dowd, does this now mean that no future Labour government could borrow for day-to-day spending? That idea of perhaps a more Keynesian-style stimulus to growth is dead in the water in the way that the British economy now works, because if the markets say you can't do something, you simply won't be able to do it?
Well, what Labour has said and continues to say is that it borrows to invest. That's the issue, and that's what the last, under Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, and that's what we've said, that's what we're saying now. We will only borrow to invest. That's how you get the economy kick-started and moving along. You don't get it by borrowing to pay people's wages. Do you remember the Tories always used the household analogy? We'd maxed out on the credit card. They blamed us for not fixing when the roof is, when the sun's shining, we didn't fix the roof. Well, the household analogy at the moment is that everything is, even the lawn hasn't been able to be mowed, and the borrowing to pay someone to mow the lawn. It's a ridiculous scenario and situation that we're in. What we've said, and we will continue to say, we won't borrow to pay the day-to-day debts. We will borrow to invest. That's the message.
Can I just finally, we are not that long on time, unfortunately. Can I ask just finally what the Labour Party's position is now on the mini budget? Because last week the Labour Party supported the cut to the basic rate of tax. It supported the cut to the national insurance rate. It supported the 2-year energy price guarantee. Now, 2 out of 3 of those things have been changed and ripped away from the budget. To some observers, it seems like the Labour Party supports more elements of that original mini-budget than the Tories do now.
Well, look, we were in a situation where we were presented with a very limited number of options. And the Labour Party decided to go, given the circumstances, for particular options. There should have been more options on the table. But look, I just repeat, and I'll make this point very simply. We were trying to deal with a situation as being developing for 20 years, for 12 years. And so the room for manoeuvre was very limited because of that situation. We've got to always bear that in mind, that that's the situation we were in, and there were fairly limited things that anybody could do because of the build-up of 12 years of policies. And trying to unravel that is difficult and is going to be difficult, but that's what Labour's got to do.
Well, Peter Dowd, Member of Parliament for Bootle and former Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, always appreciate your time on the programme, especially this morning ahead of what is going to be an incredibly exciting Prime Minister's Questions. Thanks for joining us. Let's turn now to our panel. I'm delighted to be still joined by Ben Glaze, of course, of The Mirror, but also Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor.
Tom.
And Liam, inflation figures this morning higher than expected. What does it all mean?
10.1% in September, up from 9.9% in August. So we're now more than 5 times beyond the Bank of England's 2% inflation target, if we can remember those days when we were anywhere near it. Obviously, the cost of living is elevated. A lot of people watching and listening to GB News will feel the real increase in the cost of living over the last year, since last September, what this measures, is actually a lot more than 10%. If you're spending a high share of your household income on food and fuel, the necessities, as less well-off families do, with all respects, then inflation is much higher. Food inflation, even on the official numbers, is about 14%. I actually think the reality is even higher. And the big controversy that I think will be coming out of PMQs is that because this is the September number, as you know, Tom, as we've discussed,
before the mini budget.
This is, well, it's before the mini budget, but also the September number is what we should be uprating benefits, including the basic state pension, by next April. OK, now, last September 2021, the rate of inflation was just 3.1%. So this April 2022, benefits only went up by 3.1%, by which time inflation was 8, 9, 10%.
Well, let's throw this to Ben Glaze just quickly. Is this what Sir Keir Starmer is best placed to go on in Prime Minister's Questions today, the uprating of benefits?
That's right. As Liam said, September is taken as the measure of what benefits and the basic state pension should go up by next April. Now, when the triple lock was designed by the coalition government, that said it would go up by the highest of 2.5%, wages, or the current rate of inflation. Now, that's all well and good when inflation is around 1.5% to 3%. When inflation suddenly hits 10.1%, that becomes really unsustainable. Economically, that's what the argument is. Now, the government faces a real problem because the 2019 manifesto pledged to maintain that triple lock. There's already a big rebellion brewing on the Tory benches if the government does not go ahead with the triple lock.
And yet this morning on a broadcast round, the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, Lisa Nandy, wouldn't say that Labour would commit to uprating by the triple lock as well. Might that take the sting out of the tail? Slightly,
but then remember, Labour's in opposition. It doesn't need to say what it would do. The government is the government, and Number 10 and the Treasury refusing to commit to a promise that they made, remember, back in 2019. That will really worry a lot of pensioners. You know, I was talking to some of the campaign groups last night after Downing Street would not guarantee that the triple lock would go ahead, and they're really worried. You know, they're pointing out, well, A couple of weeks ago, you said the energy price guarantee would last 2 years. Now it's only going to last 6 months. That withdraws in April. April is when these benefits should go up in line with inflation and when the pensions should go up in line with inflation. If that doesn't happen, that's a massive real terms hit to some of the most vulnerable families.
Although I suppose the government could argue that there was a pause in that triple lock during the COVID crisis. There is some precedent for it, but I'm afraid we have run out of time on the show. Thank you both to Liam Halligan and to Ben Glaze for talking us through all of these issues today. But now there's much more to come. I'm with you for the next 2 hours as well as To The Point explores the wider political and cultural issues of the day. All to come after the weather.
Good morning, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. The rest of this week promises some pretty heavy showers, and at times it's going to be gusty, particularly today over parts of Wales and southwest England. But with the winds coming up from the south, it's always going to be fairly mild. Bit of a scrap going on between low pressure down to the southwest and high up to the northeast. That's going to keep things fine for most of today across Scotland and indeed much of eastern England. But further west, we've got weather fronts and some heavy showers around this morning through parts of Wales and Northern Ireland. Slowly drifting northwards, a few of those downpours affecting the West Midlands, maybe later on into northwest England. Further south and east, most places dry, some good spells of sunshine across western parts of Scotland, and it is pretty mild. Temperatures into the teens in most places, high teens across the south where we see a bit of sunshine, perhaps feeling a little cooler on some of these eastern coasts as the winds start to pick up, and it will be very blustery across North Wales, West Wales through this evening. So gusty winds and more heavy showers to come for Wales, southwest England, and spreading northwards once more to Northern Ireland and into parts of Scotland as we head towards dawn. So wet weather working northwards overnight. Again, further south and east, most places will become dry. Really quite warm night in the south. Temperatures likely to stay in the mid-teens in places. A wet start then to tomorrow across maybe the central belt, and that rain will push into northern parts of Scotland through the day, but turning drier across southern Scotland. Most of Wales, Northern Ireland having a much drier and brighter day tomorrow. Could see some showers though coming into parts of East Anglia and the southeast at times. Again, the air is coming up from the south. It's going to be really mild, 14, 15 degrees in the south, 18, 19 where we see some sunshine. And the winds will be lighter tomorrow as well. But the winds are likely to pick up again on Friday. The isobars squeezing together and that low pressure moving closer, bringing further bands of showers across the country. Some of them will be pretty heavy.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, Talking Pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other pay-per-review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya